So this evening's subject is the five spiritual faculties, and in particular, the balancing of the five spiritual faculties. And of course, like everything that I've learned in the Dharma and from the order over these last 35 years, I owe a great debt to our founder, Sangharakshita, and I give this talk in his honor. I'll address the nature of each of these five spiritual faculties and their relationship to each other. And next week, I shall look to the wider implication of them in terms of the altruistic dimension of life in Dharma practice and how they inform the various Buddhist schools, including our own Triratna. So the origin of this group of faculties, the five spiritual faculties, of course, comes from the most ancient text in the Buddhist tradition, from the Pali Canon, where the Buddha refers to them many times, and certainly on more than one occasion, he teaches that when the five faculties are fully developed, this amounts to awakening or enlightenment. So why these as a group? The faculties, if you like, are the dimensions of practice to develop the mind with awareness and refinement of emotion. They complement each other, all the more so when balanced, particularly balancing wisdom with faith and meditation with energy. Mindfulness is the fulcrum, it's the balancing point between each of those pairs, wisdom and faith, and meditation and energy. And mindfulness is the key to the balance or harmonization of these faculties. Each of the faculties is immediately applicable to our daily lives. At any time, we can be aware of their presence or even their absence. The faculties can also be seen as a sequence of practice that begins with faith, the arising of a confidence, trust, perhaps an epiphany, or just a growing attraction to the Buddha and the prospect of human enlightenment as exemplified by the Buddha. And dependent on the arising of this faith comes energy, that urge to pursue the path, to pursue the practices. This in turn allows the development of mindfulness through the four foundations of mindfulness, of course, and that in turn develops into a deep concentration or meditation called Samadhi in the Sanskrit. It's a meditation that begets progressive insights, culminating in wisdom. So that's a way of looking at the faculties in a sequential development. I shall approach with a description of each of them and look at the balance between the two pairs, wisdom, faith, and meditation energy. Let's begin with mindfulness because that's where everything begins in Buddhism. At first glance, it's hard to think of what more can be said that hasn't been said on mindfulness. Yet it is the core practice for developing awareness. Expanding awareness is what all spiritual quests are about. And in the Buddhist tradition, it is the transformation from conditioned awareness to the unconditioned. The Buddha's legacy on the cultivation of the faculty of mindfulness is distinct, emphatic, and systematic. The four foundations of mindfulness are bedrock foundations for cultivating awareness and eventually wisdom. To remind ourselves of the four foundations of mindfulness, the first foundation is the mindfulness of the body, its parts, components, and the raw sensations. The second foundation is the mindfulness of bodily feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, or those neither pleasant nor unpleasant. The third foundation of mindfulness is the awareness of the mental activities that include thoughts, impulses, memories, emotions, and so on. The fourth foundation, which is perhaps the most complex to fully appreciate and apprehend, is the mindfulness of mind objects. That includes the deep reflection on the five hindrances, those distractions of the mind that interfere with our meditation, the five aggregates or skandhas, which I'll come back to, the six sense bases, and the seven enlightenment factors, and the Four Noble Truths. These are 5 groups of teachings or formulae for deep contemplation and reflection when the mind is very still, having gone through mindfulness of body, its parts, sensations, feelings, and mental activities. Now, the 4 foundations is really a whole life's work in itself to fully understand, practice, and penetrate. And it's not something that we do all together all at once. We might spend some of our meditation practice on just finding awareness of the body and its parts and the sensations, or just the mindfulness of breathing. Another time, we might spend more time on understanding what's happening mentally and emotionally with us and getting clear what is happening. Might be dealing with hindrances and so on. But when we are practiced and we have experience, we are then able to step up to that full foundation and start to look at those groups, those clusters of formulae, much more deeply to understand the nature of oneself. And of course, we can see that there's a sequence to the 4 foundations, beginning by paying attention to the body, its parts, raw sensations, and components. This is because we are so much physical, we are so much body, all 60, 70, 80 kilograms of it, and all the sensations that are coming all the time. And it's just a matter of systematically dwelling upon different parts of our body to be aware of them and what we feel, what we sense, what we perceive at that moment. And then as we progress to the 2nd foundation, we are then looking at feelings, which can be quite fleeting. 1 minute, something might be pleasant. The next minute, it might be unpleasant, whether it's the pressure on the foot. First it feels warm, then it gets tingly, then it gets uncomfortable. We've gone from pleasant to unpleasant. So we start to appreciate the dynamic in these feelings, which are arising from our sensations in the body. And we start to appreciate too that it is conditional. For instance, I recall being on solitary retreats in the winter in a hut with a wood burner and having the fire stoked up and nice and warm and cozy, sitting there, enjoying the warm skin, the pleasant sensations, then focusing on the breath for a while, then doing other meditation practices, and later checking back in with the body, finding that my skin was cold, my hands were freezing, and was very unpleasant. So all those feelings had moved from pleasant to unpleasant because the conditions of the environment had changed, the fire had gone out. And we come to the 3rd foundation, which is being aware of our thoughts, mental activities, emotions, memories, impulses, and all the distractions that come with that. And this awareness, it's not about a need to judge ourselves in any way. Oh, look, I'm a failing here, or I'm just a mindless mess. It's nothing like that at all. It's really a part of the discovery of just finding out what is mind. What is the activity of consciousness? What is consciousness? And we just see all these different things happening. And along the way, as we start to settle down and calm down with progressive attention to the various foundations, we start to become more relaxed, the mind settles more, distractions start to settle away or drift away, and we become much clearer, much stiller, and we can experience finer things much more easily. That is the state we need to be in when we go to the 4th foundation, looking at these mind objects, those formulae or clusters of teachings that I mentioned earlier. And I mentioned the first group of teachings are the 5 hindrances. And of course, even in our introductory meditation courses, that is something we must learn early on, is learning to recognize hindrance, because these are the things which hinder us from developing concentration, enjoying awareness, breadth and depth. If the mind is distracted, whether it's by sense desires or by sleepiness, sloth and torpor, doubt, ill will, and so on. Being able to recognize those hindrances, and if we need to deal with them effectively. And that's one of the great benefits of doing a course with an experienced meditator, is to learn about dealing with hindrances. And one of the interesting facets of reflection that come with the fourth foundation is that we not only become aware of what is applying in our mind at the moment, we also reflect that these things are happening in other people's minds as well. This is where the Buddha refers to awareness of external hindrances, that is, hindrances in other people. So we start to realize that we are not unique in that sense, and that what we experience, other beings will also experience. The other formula that I mentioned were the 5 aggregates or skandhas. This is one of the ways the Buddha described the psychophysical being, the psychophysical organism, a human being. There's a form, which is our body. There are feelings, pleasant and unpleasant, and so on. There are perceptions. There are thoughts and volitions, impulses, and there's consciousness. It's just one way of looking at our psychophysical building. There's other ways, of course. You've heard of the 6 elements, seeing ourselves as comprising the earth element, water element, heat, air, space and consciousness, and so on. So there were many ways in which the Buddha looked at the human being just as skillful means to help us understand ourselves much more thoroughly. And the 5 skandhas or the 5 aggregates is just one way. But in this fourth foundation, we start to look at each of these and start to see that the body is conditioned and changeable. And it's not just conditioned and changeable in ourselves, it's also conditioned and changeable in other people. We even consider the origin of our form, our body, which must have come from originally an ovum or an egg, uniting with the sperm, embryo, fetus, baby, child, adolescent, adult, and here we are. And then there will be another half to the story as well. It will disappear, this form will disappear. And so we reflect on what is happening with oneself, but it will also happen in others. We do the same thing with the 6 sense bases, which, as you might remember, are the 5 common senses: smell, taste, touch, and so on. Also the mind. The mind is also seen as a sense organ, as part of its function. The mind has a response or reaction to its own thoughts. Something might come up, a memory, an idea, an impulse, and then that triggers a response. Just like the sensory organ of the nose, in response to a particular odor, will have a response. We'll have a response to it. The mind does the same thing to thoughts and emotions and so on. The 7 enlightenment factors, or bodhyangas, they probably deserve a whole talk in themselves, but I'll restrain myself tonight. We'll leave that to another time. Basically, the 7 enlightenment factors are those characteristics of the enlightened mind which are present when each of those factors is fully matured. And it's said that these develop sequentially. The first one is mindfulness. Again, everything starts with mindfulness. When mindfulness is maturing, then the capacity to investigate our mental states and understand what is skillful, what is unskillful, what is helpful and unhelpful starts to become clearer and sharper. That develop that ability to understand our mental states. And when they become acute, more energy is available for us. And that might manifest as a rapture and ecstasy, often felt either spontaneously or in meditation. And then there is serenity, another factor, another feature of the enlightened mind. And then there is the ability to engage in deep concentration or samadhi, and finally equanimity. So they're the 7 factors of enlightenment. When mature, are characteristics of the enlightened mind. We can reflect on each of them and whether any element of them is present or not present in our mind at the time we are meditating and reflecting. So we can see that we are constantly being exposed with these reflections to the conditional nature of our being and to the impermanent nature of our being. But the very positive experiences that come from the cultivation of mindfulness, all the joy of serenity, of clarity, of calmness, of peacefulness, all of those things are wonderful and keep us practicing and keeping us on the path. And the other important thing that comes from these reflections is that we start to feel progressively no longer constrained by a sense of permanent self or substance, no longer separate from other living beings, or indeed from the whole of the phenomenal world. The four foundations lead us not just to integration within ourselves, but to integration with the cosmos. There is, of course, much more to the practices than I've just described, but a reading of the relevant scripture, the Satipatthana Sutta, will do it final justice. I do recommend Sangharakshita's guide, Living with Awareness. There are, of course, other worthy commentaries and guides to the Satipatthana Sutta, but Living with Awareness is the one I'm familiar with. And this whole exercise, being so deep and wide, requires a gradual and accessible approach, making appropriate time and conditions to be able to meditate so and reflect so. And of course, as always, a spiritual friend and guide is also recommended. So, with the faculty of mindfulness established, or on the way to establishment, we have the capacity now, with this awareness, to balance the remaining two pairs of faculties. Before I completely leave mindfulness, I'll also just mention that mindfulness, whether expressed in the Pali as sati or smriti in the Sanskrit, also means memory or recollection. So this is an important part of mindfulness, where we have the capacity to recollect and to recall. And this is dependent upon having a keen, attentive faculty, a keen, attentional mind. Because if we are not able to attend to things well, we won't remember them. And clearly, memory is a critical feature for human development. For without good recollection and memory, it will be very hard to develop spiritually. So let's look at the pair of meditation and energy, sometimes described as stillness and activity. Samadhi is the Sanskrit for meditation, and virya is the traditional Sanskrit word for energy, also the same in Pali. Meditation we'll know as development of the mind by the mind. Our founder Sangharakshita has described meditation as a succession of positive mental states, that is, of increasingly skillful thoughts, moods and emotions. The skillful, of course, is that based on unconditional goodwill, wisdom based in the way things are, and selfless motive, as in open-handed generosity, is the other basis of skillfulness. And these are, of course, the opposites of ill will, ignorance, and craving. Now, to actually get us off in an interesting way, I just am reminded of a story from a wonderful collection from back in the 70s, I think it was, by Paul Reps, called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. And it's a story about an old Chinese woman who, out of her generosity and her love of the Dharma and the Sangha, had a little hut built for a monk to meditate in. And she supported this monk, cooked all this food and helped him out for a long time. And the years went by, the decades began to mount, and she wondered, I wonder how far this monk has got with all of his meditations. So she concocted a little plan, and she enlisted the help of a young woman who was apparently rich with desire. And she asked her to go and visit the monk and take him something, some food or an offering, and then become amorous towards him and caress him and see how he responds. Interesting exercise. So this happens. And what actually happened, apparently, was that the young lady went in, saw the monk, got close to him, started to exhibit some affection, started to caress him, and then said, "What now?" And he said, "The new tree grows on a cold stone. There's no warmth in winter." Not knowing how to respond, the young woman, a bit nonplussed, bowed and left the hut and came back and reported it to the old woman. And the old woman was incensed, and she thought, "Was that it? Is that all you got?" After 20 years of meditation, he, of course, fair enough not to show passion, but not even empathy, not even compassion for the way you were feeling. Ha! So after that, she went straight down the back and burned the hut down. Okay, I hope the meaning of this will become clearer. Look, there's many meditation methods, techniques with various purposes, all aimed to develop the mind in all its aspects. So we can be very engaged and engrossed for a very long time in it all. Sometimes the range of meditation practices, the suites of and systems of meditation can be almost overwhelming. However, the overexertion or overemphasis on sitting practices is only employing one channel of our psychophysical energies. It's also a purely personal occupation, valuable as it is. Whatever fruits come of our meditation, they cannot come to full ripening until shared with the world in some way. So we need to balance the mental exertions with more physical expressions. These, of course, include livelihood, our work, occupations, careers, vocations, and so on. This, more broadly and rightly, includes voluntary work, those unpaid endeavours made out of love, care, and selfless generosity. So much of our life goes into work, likely most of our lives. So it is important that we make it skillful. Likewise, other areas where we engage with other people, the living world, the environment. This includes everyone and everything, from family, friends, neighbours, the people we interact with in shops, on the phone, even on the internet and email, to the ways we conduct our lives in the physical environment, how we treat the environment, how we consume, and so on. This is now very much the concern of ethics. Energy can be refined and made more skillful with an increasing ethical sensibility. Let's not also forget the importance of creativity in all the artistic disciplines, the ones we're familiar with, as well as bringing imagination into more simple theatres, such as our gardens, our homes, our kitchens, and so on. I've recently become richly engaged in writing cards to friends for various occasions, trying to get out my best calligraphy, making something artistic in the arranging of colours and pictures and so on, composing verse and haiku. There are almost endless avenues for creative pursuit that balance the solitary practice of meditation and indeed complement it. And at their best, each complements the other. Energy, wisdom, stillness, activity. The more creative and ethically we live, the more concentrated and alive our meditation becomes. And the Buddha speaks about evenness of vigor or energy. We can apply too much or too little, whether it's an exertion in meditation or whether it's at work and many other of life's domains. So being aware of how we're actually practicing and achieving or not a balanced effort in what we're doing, whether it's with the mind or the body or both, it is key. So energy, or virya as a faculty, is the skillful use of our life energy and becomes the altruistic expression of the skillful mental states we cultivate with meditation. We now come to the second coupling, wisdom and faith, also expressed as reason and emotion, broad brushstrokes. So wisdom is prajna and faith is shraddha. These two faculties can each be described in several ways, of course, but I shall keep it broad and simple for this occasion. Let me call wisdom a knowing by seeing or direct apprehension and supported by reason. Let me call faith a knowing from the heart that becomes confidence, trust. The faith here is primarily faith or confidence, trust in the Buddha as an enlightened human being, one who is fully realized in every way. And it's not a blind faith, of course, but one forged in the crucible of experience, one that corresponds to reason and stands scrutiny of the wise. Now, both faith and wisdom eventually evolve to the same point at their maturity. The mind with deep wisdom is a mind of deep faith. The wise Dharma follower has great faith in the Buddha and his Dharma. It is essential in our practice of the Dharma to read the Buddha's words and those who are written after him, and to understand clearly what is being said. Then good reflection is needed, along with meditation, to prepare our minds to absorb and integrate these truths. Reason is necessary in examining the teachings and looking at it in our own lives. The laws of conditional arising, karma and consequences, the necessity of ethics, and so on, all appeal to reason. So far, so good. Yet we need, as Sangharakshita wrote, emotional equivalents for our intellectual understandings. As in the Zen story earlier on, insights are all well and good, but if we have no kindness or generosity, no compassion, empathy or patience, where are we really at? What benefit to the world can we be? The whole of the Buddhist tradition is about the alleviation of dukkha, of suffering, not just for oneself, but the world. Here it must be declaimed that compassion is the activity of wisdom. Faith or confidence, trust is the faculty that can arise spontaneously, yet also be cultivated. Most of us have had times when faith in some form has arisen, be it faith in a person, whether it's the Buddha or someone we have met in our own lives, faith in a tradition, a philosophy, or a practice. And faith arouses energy, the energy needed to seek, to develop, and to practice. Faith needs to be expressed. It can't be bottled up and secreted away. All spiritual and traditions, including those from indigenous cultures, contain devotional rituals ranging from the very simple to the long and complex. Some of the Tibetan Buddhist rituals go on for days. You'll be glad to know that food and tea is passed around. Festivals to commemorate significant dates in the tradition's calendar are, of course, marked with rituals. The Christmas and Easter rituals will be familiar to all of us, even if it's just come down to the giving of gifts that are placed under a tree. Ritual is a natural expression of belief in, or at least intuition of, the greater forces at play in the universe. Ritual contains elements of acknowledgement and respect, then also reverence and devotion, expressed with the use of symbols, of article or gesture, often focused on or around a central symbol on an altar, plinth, or shrine. The words are spoken often in verse, with meter and rhythm, that draw in the heart and mind, and in our tradition, mantra is commonly recited to inspire the mood of a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva figure. All of these practices can arouse faith when all the words of sacred texts sometimes cannot. Should we feel dry or uninspired with reading yet more books, with awareness and creativity, we can seek other avenues to explore devotional practices, whether they are just as simple as putting flowers on our shrine before the Buddha, burning some incense, or becoming more elaborate with recitations, verses of a puja, readings, incantations, bells and gongs, and so on. With whatever course we take to engage the devotional moods, we will need receptivity and creativity. The more we can muster of each, the deeper we can go. Wisdom and faith will grow together, but their harmony is surely made by our being mindful of our needs, aware of what nourishes the soul, what satisfies the yearning to meet the great mystery. So I'll conclude here, hoping that in this half hour, the importance of the 5 spiritual faculties in a Dharma life has emerged clearly, and that I've made a case for the Buddha's exhortation for the balance and harmony of the faculties. Next week, I shall explore the altruistic aspect of the faculties, how they work out not just at an individual level, but at a collective level. I'll also examine the influence of those faculties in the development of the different stages of a Dharma life: integration, positive emotion, insight, spiritual rebirth, and receptivity and altruistic activity. Also, how the different schools and traditions of Buddhism have come to express one or other of the faculties. I hope you can join me then. Thank you for listening.